It's possible to produce, for example, low carbon milk, low carbon beef. That's what we are trying to do based on regenerative agriculture.
Welcome to Radio Davos, the podcast from the World Economic Forum that looks at the biggest challenges and how we might solve them. This week, as the climate COP happens in the Amazon in Brazil, we look at the potential for regenerative farming to produce food without harming nature or the climate.
It would be impossible to control deforestation only based on command and control strategies. We must align conservation of the forest with good business. Otherwise, there will be no conservation.
This Brazilian entrepreneur explains how restoring degraded land and integrating trees into grazing pastures can have a big impact on farming's carbon footprint.
There's a lot of co-benefits like animal welfare, like carbon sequestration.
And we hear why it makes sense more than ever to tackle climate and nature together.
So when you bring biodiversity, water resources, deforestation together with climate change, it makes it easier for people to see the problem. This very specific COP that will be in the middle of the Amazon, maybe we can have some good news, some progress.
Follow Radio Davos wherever you get your podcasts or visit wef.ch/podcasts. I'm Robin Pomeroy at the World Economic Forum, and with this look at regenerative agriculture for nature and climate in Brazil.
We always have a hope, a potential optimism.
This is Radio Davos. Welcome to Radio Davos, and this week we're talking about something that touches all of us every day, but we don't often think about it, and that is, where does our food come from? And what impact does that have on the environment? We have a very special guest who knows all about this firsthand. But first, I'm going to introduce you to my co-host, who is a colleague at the World Economic Forum, Danielle Carreira. Hi, Danielle. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you, Robin?
I'm very well, thank you. Tell us what you do at the World Economic Forum.
So I work as the head of finance sector engagement at the Tropical Forest Alliance, which it is an initiative of the World Economic Forum. And we were set up nearly 15 years ago to really help the value chain organizations. And when I talk about value chain, I'm talking from the producers to the governments to work together, and they address the issue of commodity production linked to deforestation. And why this is important? When we look at the global level, land use change contributes to more than a fifth of CO2 emissions. And deforestation and ecosystem conversion, usually driven by agricultural commodity production, is the single largest source of these emissions. So we were set up to bring this multi-stakeholder approach to address this problem, which, as you mentioned, it touches in food security, in climate, but also in nature. By addressing deforestation, you are addressing climate, but also you are addressing the major driver of terrestrial biodiversity loss.
Yeah, this expression, land use change, it's one of those diplomatic, almost euphemisms. Very often we're talking about cutting down a forest or burning down a forest to convert that into farmland of some kind. Tell us who our guest is that we're both going to question today.
Well, I'm very, very happy to have with us today Fernando Laranja de Fonseca, and we call him Laranja. And Laranja, it is actually one of the signatories of an initiative that we partner with the UNEPFI and also the Nature Conservancy to deal exactly what I mentioned in the beginning, to bring all these stakeholders in the value chain to work together and address the issue of the financing side, which is very important to provide the producers with the finance need to change the production systems.
Hi, Laranja. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to talk for such a very important subject.
Where are you speaking to us from today?
I'm speaking from São Paulo, Brazil right now.
So you have an interesting career in agriculture. Could you tell us a few of the things that you've done?
Yeah, actually, my academic background is in the agricultural field. I'm a veterinarian. I have a master's degree in agronomy. I have a PhD in veterinary science, a postdoctoral degree in animal science. So I developed the first part of my career in the academic sector as a professor at University of São Paulo Veterinary School during 10 years. And so after this journey in the academic sector, I decided to move to the Amazon region, and I started my journey as an entrepreneur in this field of impact investment investment and related to agricultural sector and forestry sector. And so many, many years ago, I found a company called Ouro Verde Amazônia that was a Brazil nut processing company. It was a very interesting experience where we involved local communities from the Amazon, a supplier of Brazil nut and this kind of thing. It was at that time, let's say, the embryo of this impact investing sector. This company was the first B Corp in Brazil. And so it was very interesting experience. After solding my company, I moved completely to the investment side. So that was my second hat. I founded a company called Caapora Investimento. That's an investment company. We raised the first private equity fund dedicated to impact investing in the Amazon 12 years ago. It was such an interesting experience as well. At that time, we analyzed more than 200 companies in the Amazon region to check the possibilities of investment. We invested in 3 of them. And so that was very interesting. And after that, I came back to the entrepreneur side. I founded 2 companies. One is No Carbon Milk. That was the first organic, carbon neutral, and animal welfare certified milk brand in Brazil, as well as Caapora Agro Silvo Pastoril. That is a company dedicated to the development of innovative system of livestock production based on low carbon, zero deforestation, and conversion of degraded pasture.
Great. Both of you are involved also in finance. So that's something I want to get to later in our conversation. But Laranja, how can the type of farming how can it be sustainable?
Well, I would say that it's possible to produce sustainable food. And even in this sector, let's make more restricted animal production. Because there's a lot of concern about the impact of animal production, especially in the climate agenda. And yes, it's true. But in our experience, what we saw is that it's possible to produce, for example, low carbon milk, low carbon beef. That's what we are trying to do based on regenerative agriculture concept. So yes, it's possible. It's a huge challenge because we need to scale these new models of sustainable and low carbon and regenerative agriculture. But yes, it's possible to do that.
The word you often see mentioned is silvopasture, kind of a sustainable form of agroforestry. Are you able to tell us what that means?
Our business model at Caapora is based on some pillars, and one of them is the conversion of degraded pasture. So we have here in Brazil many, many million hectares of degraded land. So just to give you some numbers, the livestock sector in Brazil occupy 170 million hectares of land with pastures. And at least 50 million hectares of pastures have some kind of degradation. So we have a huge space to convert this degraded land, degraded pastures in high productive pasture. But the second pillar is the silvopastoral system, as you mentioned. That means that we plant some trees in the middle of the pasture. So we do not only recover degraded pastures and transform in high productive pasture, but we plant some trees in the middle of the pasture. So there's a lot of co-benefits like animal welfare, like carbon sequestration.
Can that be scaled, though, to be less of a niche product? Because you could sell, I'm assuming, if you've got low carbon or no carbon milk or meat, people will pay a premium for that in some parts of the world, but probably the majority, I'm guessing, of those products won't be produced under these methods. Do you see a future when that can be expanded and can be more of kind of the mainstream?
Yes, but actually it's not an easy answer. I would say that there is not a high demand for example, carbon neutral products. We need much more education to the consumer. But by the other side, the market, so let's change. Instead of the final consumer, let's say that the market has a demand for low carbon products or carbon neutral products. And so you can ask me, well, if it's not the consumer, who is the market? And I would tell you that the market is investors, for example. So investors put pressures on companies because they are on the boards of the company. The retail sector, the supermarkets, they have pressure. They put some pressure in the market to have low carbon products. There are regulations from the side of the governments. So there's a lot of ingredients or stakeholders in the market that put pressure to have low carbon products. And more than that, we have a carbon credit market that could bring money to transform the production system in a low carbon system. That's our case. So we are seeing there is a potential revenue for our business that comes from the carbon credit market instead of a low carbon product for the end producer. But it's another way to provide or to give support for the transformation of the agricultural practices.
So you're saying that in addition to getting revenue from the product itself, farmers can also get revenue from selling the credit of having sequestered carbon.
It's exactly as you said. We have two potential opportunities, or by selling an added value product because some consumers will pay a premium, and that's okay. Probably this market exists. I think that it's still small, and I think it will grow. But by the other side, there are another source of revenue. That's the carbon credit market. You're right.
Can I just add one point? There is a lot of market demand. A lot of this market demand, it is coming from Europe, mostly. Yes, I think that's very important to highlight. And we see some leading companies which are demanding for that. Sometimes because of consumer pressure, because again, the consumer market in Europe, it is a little bit more aware. And I think when we talk financially, they, to a point, I'm not going to say they can afford, but if you compare the north of the globe and the south of the globe, of course, there is an inequality, in income. There is a major driver coming from Europe. There are regulations as well, but I think one thing that we have a big challenge is that there is a demand on how we want our products, but there is a lack of sort of who is going to pay for the transition, who is going to pay for the cost to actually change the production models as well. And this payment, and that's why we at TFA are trying to bring all the stakeholders, because there is a lot of opportunity because of increasing demands, but the costs need to be shared. And when I mean sharing, the producer needs to be included in this cost sharing as well, and this opportunity side. At the moment, we just expect producers to change production models, but there is not much financial incentives to do so. So I think this is the question, and that's where carbon could come to complement this as a financial incentive, in addition to the contribution of all the actors across the value chain.
Is that already happening? I know you're involved with innovative finance. Is that part of that, or is that an additional thing as well?
Innovative finance is part, yes. I think what we need is the market demand. We need the enabling environment, and that is going to come from policymakers and regulators. And we need the innovative finance, which is the finance outside the box, outside the mainstream, the finance as usual as we have now. We have launched the initiative which is called Innovative Finance for the Amazon, Cerrado and Chaco. And this is a partnership with the Nature Conservancy and the UNEP Climate Finance Unit. And what we wanted is exactly that, to bring investors, banks, supply chain companies, providers of the catalytic finance, and catalytic finance can have different meanings, but is the money who is going to take some of the risk from the operation, pretty much. It's a long-term capital, it's a patient capital, which can go towards technical assistance and other sort of purpose as well. And what we wanted to do is to bring all these stakeholders together, break the silos, because nowadays we live in silos, pretty much. The producers only talk to producers, the financiers only talk to financiers, policymakers. So we're trying to break the silo, make them talk, and develop new financial instruments to support this transition in a way that the producer is going to have access to credits, which can be cheaper, it can be a longer term, because as Laranja mentioned earlier, they need to restore the land. To restore the land, while they're restoring, there is no income for them. So they need this long-term capital to help them to restore and then produce and then sell. And in this initiative, now we have 25 signatories. Laranja is one of them, which collectively committed to 5 billion investments to support the transition of the cattle sector, the soy sector, and agroforestry and sustainable management of non-timber forest products as well. And since the launch at COP26, which was nearly 5 years ago, they have developed 17 financial instruments, and they have already disbursed $500 million. So this is $500 million arriving on the ground to help the producers for this purpose.
Let me make some comments about some very interesting points that Dani mentioned. First of all, I agree with Dani that Europe is leading this, let's say, pressure or demand for more sustainable, low carbon products. And that's absolutely right. But more than that, in my opinion, I think that other markets will put the bar up. I would say few people consider that, for example, China's market could be more sophisticated or demand another kind of products in terms of sustainability, but it's very important to pay attention in the China's market. And it's very important for Brazil, for example, because we export a lot of products for the China's market. So the bar will be up. The Europeans are just starting the process. So this is a kind of thing that there's no way to avoid, and it's positive. Yes, we need investments and we need innovative ways of developing these financial products like blended finance, like bringing catalytic capital to make it viable. Because once we have more and more scale with the good practices, regenerative agriculture, the cost will be decreasing. I can give you the example of milk in our case. I can tell you that yes, it's possible to produce a carbon neutral milk with the technology that we have today with 10% higher cost than regular milk. You can say, well, it's not too much, but 10% is not zero. But if we have more companies working on models of carbon neutral milks, for example, in the future, this cost will decrease. I mean, in few years, we will have a higher cost of 5% instead of 10. So it's a question of scale too. So it's important to develop this innovative mechanism of finance, like blended finance, catalytic capital, etc.
Tell us how you make carbon neutral milk, because famously cows produce a lot of methane. In addition to, particularly in the part of the world where you are, there's the deforestation element to create pasture land for cattle to graze. But even if you weren't cutting down trees for that and you just had a field with cows in it, they're still producing greenhouse gas themselves. How do you make up for that? Because you can't entirely stop that happening, can you?
In our case, we use all technologies that we have today to reduce as much as possible the carbon footprint of the milk in our farm. So, for example, we were the first dairy farm of using one specific feed additive to reduce methane emission in Brazil. And so we make as much as possible to reduce the carbon footprint. And the residue of the carbon footprint we neutralize by planting trees in the middle of the pasture. So we make a calculation based on international standards, and at the end, the final equation was a carbon neutral milk. But I can give you other numbers associated with the beef production. That's the same situation. And normally, beef production generates a lot of carbon emission. And based on the increase in the productivity, we decrease a lot the carbon emission. I can give you some numbers. In the Tocantins state, that's a state in Brazil located in the Amazon region, I will mention round numbers. We have 50 kilos of CO2 equivalent per kilo of meat produced, per kilo of carcass. That's the average. In our farms, we are making the first measurements, and the carbon footprint, it will be around 20 kilos of CO2 equivalent per kilo of meat, of carcass. So it's less than half. And why it happens? Because we increase productivity a lot. I can give some numbers of the average productivity in Brazil. 1 head per hectare, 400 grams of weight daily gain of each cattle. In our system, we have 3 cows per hectare and 600 grams per cow per day of weight gain. So when we put all this together, we have 4 times increase in productivity. You can imagine that 4 times in a sector that uses 170 million hectares of land. So you can imagine how much land we can save if we develop this model of high productive pasture with feed supplement during the dry season, with clean water provide for the cattle, with shade provide for the cattle. So it 4 times increase productivity and have carbon footprint in a sector that occupy 170 million hectares. That's a huge potential we have here.
So, what needs to happen to increase this, to scale this up? What's standing in the way?
I always say that there are 3 reasons why we do not have an acceleration in the scale of this transformation. For example, in Brazil, in the livestock sector, the highest opportunity in terms of land use in the world. I mean, the improvement. Again, 170 million hectares with very low productivity. So I always say it's a huge sector with bad numbers in terms of productivity. So the space where we have the most opportunity. This transformation doesn't occur because, one, the farmer doesn't have knowledge how to do that. Second, okay, the farmer has the knowledge but doesn't have the money. And so, third option, he doesn't want. He has the money, the knowledge, but he doesn't want. So there are 3 possibilities, and you can ask why. But what's the reason for why he doesn't want? Because he thinks that it's a complex system. The price of the land, anyway, is increasing, so he's comfortable. That's okay to keep the system as it is. So knowledgement, no money, or no desire. 3 basic reasons for that.
Danielle, you mentioned the climate COP, where this initiative that you mentioned, the innovative finance initiative for these areas in Brazil, the climate COPs are about climate change, and it's coming to Brazil very shortly, the latest one, COP30. Increasingly, it's joining up with the nature agenda, isn't it? Why is that so important, do you think, to bring these two could be seen as separate things together?
For me, it's essential. It's not just important. It's essential. Like I mentioned, when we look from a land use perspective, and in Brazil, the major driver of emission, it is conversion of lands, like we said, forest and other important biomes. Yeah, we talk a lot about the Amazon, but we have, for example, a very important biome which is next to it, which is called the Cerrado. And the Cerrado is pretty much like super important from a water security perspective. We have the main water basins going under that biome. As we convert land there, we create a huge hydric risk. Without water, there is no agriculture, there is no energy in Brazil, comes mostly from water as well. And also, it's really, really important. And emissions and climate risks are actually having an impact on nature as well. So without addressing the both of them together, we are going to be between the chicken and egg situation forever. And I think it's quite interesting because I started working on sustainable finance many, many years ago, back in 2012. And at the time, I used to be head of environment at the organization, where I used to think environment as climate, as nature, and everything. And then we separated climate from nature to hopefully make it a bit more efficient on how the private sector, how governments are addressing the issue, And then nature became a little bit behind, is lagging behind. But now we are seeing climate impacts on nature and vice versa, pretty much. So one cannot go without the other. So it's very, very important that private sector and governments take the systemic approach to address both issues. And again, there is a lot of opportunity, financial opportunity, economic opportunity by addressing those simultaneously as well.
Laranja, what brought you into it then? You studied to be a vet in Sao Paulo, but then you moved to the Amazon and got really into this sustainable agriculture, regenerative farming, however we call it. Why? What led you into that?
It was a personal decision when I decided to quit my academic career many, many years ago. It was because the deforestation rate at that time was very, very high. And in my perspective, it would be impossible to control deforestation only based on command and control strategies. We must align conservation of the forest with good business. Otherwise, there will be no conservation. So that was my perspective, and it still is. And so there are many potential business opportunities that we have there, but the low-hanging fruit is livestock. Because in terms of land use, livestock uses most of the area. I can give you some number. 70% of the arable land in the world is used for animal protein production. If you must find a better way for using the land, and 70% of the land is used to animal production, the conclusion is you must create an innovative system of animal production, and mainly in the livestock sector. And so that was the reason why we decided to create this company to develop this new innovative mechanism of production livestock.
Just one thing that I want to comment as well. I think it's very important because we always think about cattle sector, we think about foods. Yeah, but it's really important to remember as well that the cattle sector is actually exposed to a number of different economic activities. We have the leather, we have the collagen, we have something that we use to create our iPhone, the glue. We have something that we use to paint our wall. So there is a number of derivatives of the cattle that people don't think of. Of course, there is a very important food security issue there, but we are talking about a number of other economic activities as well. The same goes with palm oil, the same goes with soy, the same goes with a number of other commodities which are driving deforestation across the globe.
Yeah, considering what you just said, last week I was in a conference at FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization in Italy, and there was a special session about the leather industry. And it's very interesting because leather represents 1% of the value of the livestock sector. But there is a strong pressure in this sector that put pressure on the livestock sector, even representing 1% of the value, because of the pressure that we have in the fashion industry. So it's amazing. It's very interesting, and it's positive.
Do you have any hopes for COP30 then, it being in Brazil? Some people are a little skeptical of the climate COPs. Do you think it can advance any of the problems you're most interested in?
I am hopeful. I think if I wasn't hopeful, if I didn't have this positive feeling, I wouldn't be doing my job here. Yes, climate COPs can be very disappointing because, of course, we have high expectations, but it is about the collective. Yes, so each step that we give in the right direction is very, very important. And I think in Brazil, we are in a very good moment where I was talking earlier about enabling policies, and Laranja was talking about restoration of pasture land. The Brazilian government has launched a program, for example, which is called Brazil Greenway. And the aim there is to restore 40 million hectares of pasture land to expand sustainably the agricultural production. And it's amazing because they work very closely with the Ministry of Environment, they work very closely with the Brazilian Treasury. And the Brazilian Treasury as well, is created a program called EcoInvest, where they are providing for banks in Brazil capital at a very lower cost. So the financial sector can become part of this effort and help the other companies and the supply chain and farmers in this transition as well. So I think there is a lot of things to be celebrated. We have urgency science telling us that we need to act quickly. But for me, every step in the right direction, it is an improvement, it is a progress, and we need to celebrate. So I am highly hopeful.
Laranja?
Yeah, actually, we always have a hope, a potential optimism, even considering that we have some frustration about what is happening in the international scenario of this climate change issue. maybe now this very specific COP that will be in the middle of the Amazon, maybe we can have some good news, some progress. And as Danielle mentioned, we have some good facts. For example, the EcoInvest, we are looking for getting some money from the EcoInvest program. We have the TFFF fund as a very interesting news. So yes, I think that we can have some progress.
The COP, it's still a climate COP because there is a nature COP as well. There's the biodiversity convention as well. But nature will be on people's minds if they're traveling to the middle of the Amazon where this thing is. And at a time where there is some political skepticism about climate change once again, this seems to go in cycles, these things, perhaps the link with nature that everyone will see the people who are going to that COP, and when they think about any of these initiatives to boost climate action and nature together, perhaps that's also a way of slightly depoliticizing the climate change issue, do you think? Because no one wants to see the destruction of a rainforest because of the nature that will disappear, even if they're not considering or want to avoid thinking about climate change. Am I right in thinking that?
So I'm going to give my one piece here of what I think. I think nature, it is local. Yes, to address nature loss and nature restoration, we do need local participation. It is like the impact is felt locally as well. In Brazil, we had droughts and we had floods in the past 15 months. We saw farmers losing the entire production. We saw people losing their houses and all of that. So nature is closer to people. So I think it is a way to politicize, but also to share the agenda, the responsibility, the awareness at a global level in a more harmonious way than what we did from a climate perspective. So I think it is very good. And I think you mentioned the biodiversity COPs. I've been to biodiversity COP last year in Colombia. And again, we are trying to bring the climate agenda together because we need both of them to be addressed together. But I think nature will change a little bit the game and is going to help us in advance a bit faster than we did with climate, because it is a local problem as well, but of course with global impact.
Yeah, in my perspective, Robin, I agree with you. If we can join this agenda of nature together with climate change, it would facilitate the process. When we bring biodiversity, water resources, deforestation together with climate change, it makes it easier for people to see the problem, because sometimes climate change is like an abstraction. If you are not a scientist, it's not so easy or clear to understand that. So when you bring deforestation, for example, it has such a visual impact that you connect the dots easily.
Luis Fernando Laranja da Fonseca, the CEO of Grupo Caapora. You also heard my colleague and co-host Danielle Carreira, Head of Finance at the Tropical Forest Alliance. If you want to know more on how we can make farming deforestation free and profitable, head to the forum's Tropical Forest Alliance and find out about its innovative finance for the Amazon, Cerrado and Chaco initiative. It aims to create new opportunities for investment and growth in Brazil, Argentina and Paraguay. There's a link in the show notes. And please follow Radio Davos wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating or a review. You can find all our podcasts at wef.ch/podcasts or on any podcast app. This episode was written and presented by me, Robin Pomeroy, with editing by Jerry Johansson and studio production by Taz Callagher. Radio Davos will be back next week, but for now, thanks to you for listening and goodbye.